Remember the Breslau-Friends. Today we have the 20th of June in 2021. I have to say this again, there are until today no talks about resistance in the Third Reich or topics that somehow in this or another way have to do with the Breslau-Friends. There's simply nothing. Silence all around. I'm still standing abandoned and all alone, but I hope solid as a rock, because I want to cling to my solid rock, which is the Christ. It is important to make this clear, because there is an extreme amount of lying going on these days. And everyone who went to school in Germany can remember the feeling of disappointment, because he or she was told everyone took part in the unjust regime of the Hitler government, or at least all kept silent. But a few days ago I reported on an exception that was the daughter of the Kaiser, Victoria Louise. I summarize briefly again. My grandmother was born in 1892 as daughter of the German Emperor. In 1913 she had married the Duke of Brunswick. In 1918, as the German Emperor was pushed aside, also the Duke had to resign and leave the country. And in 1926 the Duke could return, but my grandmother stayed a little longer in Austria. 1 year later she also wanted to return to her homeland, but then a palace administrator, this was a woman who looked very similar to my grandmother. She was a double or look-alike. She locked my grandmother out of the palace. It was a coup d'etat. My grandmother was threatened and she had to flee the country again, which consequently brought her to Silesia. There she earned her living as a secretary, a bookkeeper, and later as a bank clerk. In 1936 my mother was born, whom my grandmother entrusted to the family of a good friend of hers. Therefore my mother was then an adopted daughter of the Grand Duke of Hesse. Please note that everything you read about the Duchess of Hanover on the internet from about 1927 onward, this most likely was not my grandmother, but this other woman. This is important because this other woman was friendly to the Hitler regime, which would never have entered grandmother's mind. I had to witness, it was maybe 1977, how it was explained by a leading police officer, in German einem Dienststellenleiter, and this was in Hanover, why politics did not want to accept a complaint against the false Duchess. I heard how my mother was told that the complaint would be formally recorded, but would not be forwarded or processed. The false Duchess refused any investigation of her identity, and politics prevented that this fraud was investigated. In 1980, this false Duchess eventually died, but even after that nothing was done that would have rehabilitated my grandmother. This was the first part of 5. I do not want to anticipate the criminal investigations, should there finally be any. As said, also my mother had no success with her complaint with the police in Hanover. She was simply not accepted. Then she had tried it with the police in Hessenland. Also there her credibility was damaged by this affair with this false Duchess. About this in the following part. It is also on a private level a catastrophe, because grandmother had to leave children in the ducal castle. Those children spent their childhood and youth under the influence of this false woman, who brought them up to strongly dislike their own mother. Thus it was later said that these children, although wealthy, did not help her own mother, that is my grandmother, in great financial difficulties when she asked them. This rupture has never been repaired. Grandmother had to renounce them. She had stipulated that these should not receive any inheritance. But the criminals solved this to their advantage in such a way that grandmother could not get her hands on the vast domain that she had inherited from the late Duke of Brunswick in 1953. This man, this duke, had literally written in his will to the emperor's daughter, and this is my grandmother. In the next part of this series, I will continue with my mother, Princess Johanna.